Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, A Year in the Maine Woods, written by Bernd Heinrich. I do not know how much I paid for this book, nor do I know where I bought it, but I do know it's used because of the sticker right here, which I would never put on any of my books that I buy new. The copyright information says that the cover design is by Gene Seal, the text design by Irving Perkins Associates, set in 11-point Garamond light by Page Setters Inc. This is the first paperback printing, October 1995. Bernd Heinrich was born in 1940, according to this information, and that matters because of the introduction. I don't like doing things by proxy. By profession, I'm a naturalist and a scientist, but I'm also a human being. And whatever else I may aspire to, inevitably, I am what I do. For the past 25 years, I've been teaching at a university, which means what I also do is fill out forms, read memos, and sit in meetings. Sometimes I apply for grants, and sometimes I write papers. But what I really want to do is to be out in the woods. By the time I was 10 years old, I had lived for 6 years as a refugee in a northern German forest. My family survived on very little, but I had a lot. I had a pet crow and I could collect beetles. Sometimes lately I have begun to wonder if it is still possible to taste the world up close as I did as a child. I long to see nature again as I did then, fresh, clear, timeless, and shrouded in magic. Would it be possible to rediscover the vividness that I now experience only as brief, tantalizing flashbacks? Edward Abbey said, "You must brew your own beer, kick in your TV, kill your own beef, build your own cabin, and piss off the front porch whenever you bloody well feel like it." I already had a good start. As a teenager in rural Maine after we came to America, I had learned hunting, fishing, and trapping in the wilderness. My Maine mentors had long ago taught me to make home brew. I owned a rifle, and I'd already built a log cabin. The rest should be easy. I thought I'd give it a shot. This speaks volumes, really. Firstly, like I said, he was born in 1940, so those 6 years as a refugee were likely due to his family being displaced because of the end of World War II and just World War II in general. He also quotes Edward Abbey, which I think in my video on There Was a River and in videos with books by Rick Bass, I've mentioned in the past a lot of authors seem to reference him. Gary Paul Nabin references him, Terry Tempest Williams references him, Rick Bass references him, the authors of There Was a River. A lot of those authors reference Edward Abbey. He is one of those characters I'm personally not a fan of. He had a very chaotic mindset. He wanted to be almost militantly against the destruction of the West. And though I believe a lot of the West has been destroyed and paved over and dammed and destroyed, I am not the sort that would encourage the kinds of behaviors that he encouraged. But aside from that, he's also a very well-written author, and a lot of other authors reference him. So, just off of hearing this, I know that Bernd Heinrich is well-read. He knows his nature writing. He is writing about a decade and a half after Abbey did his work. And so, this is a really well-informed author. He starts in the summer. The route from Burlington, Vermont to my cabin is about 200 miles long. Most of the way you travel on Route 2 through the cities of Montpelier, and St. Johnsbury, Vermont, through Lancaster and Gorham, New Hampshire, at the foot of the northern presidentials, and then to Rumford, Maine, past the great Boise Cascade paper mill. When I smell the Rumford mill, I feel like I'm almost home. It's only a few more miles to the foot of Mount Blue, where Big Web Lake fills the valley below Mount Tumbledown, Blueberry Mountain, and Little Jackson Mountain. But it's been a long ride for a baby raven. My friend Chuck Rice and I got him on May 13th, after setting up a ladder that just barely reached to the nest in a recess on a granite cliff. The black flies attacked us mercilessly, but the bird's parents left when we came. Chuck, who builds houses, climbed easily to the top, and I watched his progress, for once quite satisfied to experience the thrill vicariously. I had already done the hard part, getting the permits. The young bird Chuck brought down was feathered out and already close to adult weight. His wing and tail feathers had a beautiful bluish-purple sheen, but he still had a few wispy tufts of white down on the top of his head. He was clumsy, not yet a flyer, but already a good hopper. He did not appear to be afraid of us as he calmly looked us over with steely, light blue eyes. He readily seized the meat that we held in front of him. He either swallowed it right away or spit it out and flung it violently aside as if he did not approve of its taste. So, right off the bat, we learn some other things about him. In the author's note, he had mentioned having a pet raven. A pet crow, actually. In this, he's looking for a pet raven. And he's also going to a wild nest to find that raven, rather than having found one that was abandoned or one that was injured. He is stealing one from its parents' nest. And that may speak in a negative light per se, that he would do something like that, but it's not necessarily bad, I don't think, and ultimately this raven pet ends up being with him for much of the year, and then it flies off later in the year and he spends some time without a pet raven, and in the end, in May of the following year, he returns with a new raven and a cabin well furnished, and he really spends his time in this cabin, one that has no running water or no electricity hooked up, and he lives there, but he also still teaches, and so he kind of commutes back and forth, but his primary residence is in that cabin. He says, "June and July turn out to be happy months for me. Many of my journal entries during this time are brief. May 31st through June 2nd, settled into camp, played with Jack, cut firewood, many white flowers." I'm going to skip a lot of entries down to June 20th and 21st. Split and piled wood. Black flies a little less. Finished digging, hauling rocks, and rolling and cajoling them into place. Last of north wall was built. Was tired afterward. Needed nap. Most flowers are done blooming in the woods. It rained buckets. A tiny spider overnight built a most exquisite net over my table. Fed it 2 mosquitoes. It wrapped them up in silk and pulled them out of the net immediately. Watched sapsucker tree, as usual. July 5th, more digging of latrine, drawing, walks with Jack, reading. And a lot of the entries in that early period are just really quick, really short. He does describe some of those days a bit more in detail, but for the most part, he's kind of jumping between days. He doesn't get into detail about each and every day, but he hits the highlights. There's one around November that I really enjoyed. In the section merely titled Election Time, he says, "Charlie, my nephew, has come from North Carolina. He's taken a week off from his graduate studies to go deer hunting with me, a somewhat more traditional activity this time of year than counting flies. He mentions on page 127 in that same section that they saw no deer all week. They ended up not getting any good deer for their season. But November 8th and 9th is simply titled Jack. Jack is the name of his raven. And, he's only had it for 4 or 5 months at this point. 5 or 6 months, I guess. And I guess from reading it, he had been interacting with ravens nearby, and as he was growing, he was becoming more and more wild, more free-spirited. Ravens have that kind of personality, And that section ends with the simple paragraph, I watched the ravens returning to roost on many evenings, always wondering if Jack might be among them. Finally, on one evening later in the year, I was sure I saw him. Unlike ever before, a raven left its formation and fluttered all around me in the top of the spruce, as I stretched out my hand hopefully. Jack, Jack, come here! As it came within 15 feet of me, but the raven did not answer. It just looked me over closely, then flew into the roost in the pines to join the others. Yet several minutes later, it left the roost and flew around me again before rejoining its fellows. Now, a couple notes on this book. There are some illustrations in it. This one reads, The Spotted Salamander from Under the Woodpile. He draws some of the moths that he sees. He draws some of the plants that he sees. Like he described himself, he is a naturalist, and so he does take interest in those kinds of things. But he spends his time there and really writes about living in the woods and moments back and forth with people in the town nearby, or interacting with family, or interacting with friends, all set in the backdrop of the Maine woods. It's a fascinating book, and I really enjoy it. It's kind of hard with all the books that I discuss to find time to sit down and read a book over and over again, especially when I have so many other books I want to get to. But this is one of those that I can see myself on a calm afternoon in the summer or spring just sitting down and reading portions of it. I'm not going to read all of it all at once, I don't think, but this is a good book to sift through and read portions of, kind of similar to first and second person rural, which are just up here. Those two books up there. First person rural I discussed on this channel about a year ago. Second person rural expands on that, and the northeast of the United States is a really fascinating area for me. And I don't think I'll ever live there, but I really enjoy reading about the people that do love living in those wintry climates. And this book in particular is a great example of that. And so, if you find this book on a bookshelf, I would recommend picking it up. It was worth the money I spent on it. Like I said, I don't know how much that was, but I know just from reading it once and then going back and reading portions of it when I have time and interest, it's been really enjoyable. So, yeah, I think this is a good book for anyone who has listened to my books. I think this is a good book for anyone who has listened to my rants about that guy who made the cabin in Alaska, first person rural, or, welcome to the goddamned ice cube. A lot of other of those books where someone is living in the north and just enjoying it. One Man's Wilderness, that's the name of the book, with the cabin in Alaska. This is similar to it, not quite as remote, not quite as isolated, but very fascinating nonetheless. And I think if you like those books, this is going to be a great book for you. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.